it really was fun. You know, I tell people, I say I like the 18 for two reasons. One, they paid me a lot of money. Two, we always had a plan.
It was one of the loudest shows on television, gunfire, engines, and laughter echoing through living rooms across America. But beneath the noise of the A-Team, something quiet was at work. A message, a truth, hidden in plain sight. And after 4 decades of silence, Mr. T is finally telling the world what it really meant. Not a story of fame, but of faith, loyalty, and what makes a team unbreakable. Mr. T, it's not always violence. For years, Mr. T was the face of strength, a walking symbol of toughness, resilience, and righteous fury. When he stormed onto screens as B.A. Baracus in the A-Team, audiences saw a man who could take down a dozen bad guys, fix a van from scratch, and still have time to deliver his catchphrase, "I pity the fool." But what fans didn't know, what Mr. T never said aloud until much later, was that the character wasn't just fiction. It was therapy. In a series of candid interviews decades after the show ended, Mr. T admitted that B.A. Baracus wasn't simply a role he played. It was a version of himself he needed to become. The gold chains, the mohawk, the intensity, each piece wasn't created to impress, but to protect. "People thought I was acting," he once said, "but I was surviving." That statement changed everything for longtime fans who had idolized him as a larger-than-life action hero. Behind the iconic jewelry and bravado was a man who had grown up in Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, where survival meant creating armor, both literal and emotional. The show's producers saw that energy and shaped it into a marketable icon. But for Mr. T, the A-Team was more than a paycheck. It was a form of representation he rarely saw on television. A strong black man who didn't just fight. He stood for something. For years, fans watched him growl at Murdoch, bark orders, and punch through walls. But they missed the quiet moments, the way B.A. refused to kill, the way he always helped the innocent, the way he treated children with unexpected gentleness. That, Mr. T later explained, was no accident. B.A. didn't drink, didn't curse, didn't hurt the weak. He said, "That was me. That was what I wanted kids to see." And that's the revelation most people never caught. The A-Team wasn't about violence, it was about values. Underneath all the explosions and chaos, Mr. T built a moral code into the show. The muscles were entertainment, but the message was simple. You can be tough without being cruel. You can be powerful and still kind. When Mr. T reflected on those years, he spoke with both pride and exhaustion. The fame had been immense. Posters, action figures, cereal boxes, even cartoons. Yet, the man beneath the mohawk carried a quiet burden. The world saw the armor, not the heart. "I wasn't just playing a role," he said in one interview. "I was trying to show the world that a man like me, big, loud, different, could still have morals." He revealed how much of B.A.'s compassion came from his own mother's teachings. She was the one who told him never to be ashamed of strength, but to use it to protect others. That advice became the backbone of his performance. Every glare, every growl, every line about loyalty, it all traced back to that early lesson. Fans thought the gold chains were vanity, but for Mr. T, they were symbols of bondage turned into pride. "Each chain I wear," he once said, "reminds me of my ancestors who were slaves. What was meant to break us now shines around my neck." That deeper meaning hidden beneath a network action show, was the revelation he finally let out decades later. The armor had cracked, and the man inside could finally speak freely. It reframed the A-Team entirely. What once seemed like popcorn entertainment now looked like coded storytelling about identity, dignity, and finding honor in a world that misjudged you. Fans who revisited the series after hearing his confession started to notice the subtleties. How B.A. often questioned authority, how he valued loyalty over fame, how his supposed anger was really frustration with injustice. Those layers, Mr. T revealed, were intentional. He wasn't just a hired muscle on the team, he was the show's moral compass. For Mr. T, the fool he pitied wasn't always the villain. Sometimes it was the world itself, too busy being entertained to notice what the show was really saying. But before the legend of Mr. T and his message could take shape, a whirlwind of chance, chaos, and television ambition had to collide, giving birth to the A-Team. Chaos, vision, and chemistry. The year was 1983. American television was in flux. Viewers were growing tired of heavy dramas and dark police procedurals. NBC needed something bold, fast, and unapologetically fun. Out of that creative chaos came an idea so outrageous it shouldn't have worked. 4 fugitives from a forgotten war, surviving as soldiers of fortune, helping the helpless for the price of justice. It was half action, half comedy, and pure adrenaline. Producer Stephen J. Cannell, already known for hits like The Rockford Files, wanted to create a show that captured the rebellious spirit of the early 80s. Along with co-creator Frank Lupo, he envisioned something different. A team of outsiders doing good, even when the world branded them as criminals. It would have the moral weight of Mission Impossible, the humor of The Dukes of Hazzard, and the heart of a Saturday morning cartoon. Casting would make or break it. Cannell and Lupo knew they needed 4 personalities that didn't blend. They had to clash just enough to make magic. George Peppard, the old Hollywood charmer, brought gravitas as Hannibal Smith, the cigar-chomping leader with the iconic line, "I love it when a plan comes together." Dirk Benedict, fresh off Battlestar Galactica, was the smirking conman Templeton Face Peck. Dwight Schultz took on the eccentric pilot Howling Mad Murdoch, a wild card of chaos and comic relief. And then there was Mr. T. He wasn't a classically trained actor. He wasn't even part of the Hollywood machine. But one look at his presence, his mohawk, his build, his defiant stare, and Cannell knew he was looking at something no other show had. Authenticity. Mr. T wasn't pretending to be tough. He was tough. And that's exactly what the A-Team needed. Behind the scenes, executives doubted it. Could an ensemble with such wildly different backgrounds actually work? Could an ex-bodyguard with gold chains stand toe-to-toe with an Oscar-nominated veteran like Peppard? Cannell believed so. He said later, "You don't cast chemistry, you catch it." When cameras finally rolled, something clicked. The chemistry wasn't smooth, it was electric. Peppard's old-school discipline clashed with Mr. T's raw energy, and somehow that tension worked. Schultz's unpredictable humor balanced Benedict's suave charm. Each man brought a different rhythm, and the friction became part of the magic. The pilot episode aired in January 1983, following the Super Bowl, a risk that turned into instant success. Millions tuned in, and suddenly, the van, the mohawk, and the explosions were everywhere. Overnight, the A-Team wasn't just a TV show, it was a phenomenon. The beauty of the A-Team was in its contradictions. It was violent, yet almost bloodless. Explosions filled every episode, but no one ever seemed to die. It was macho and absurd at the same time. And underneath all the chaos, there was heart, a sense of loyalty, of honor among misfits. The formula was simple: good guys framed for a crime they didn't commit, helping those who couldn't help themselves. But what kept audiences coming back was the team's bond. For Mr. T, this was more than a breakout role. It was validation. He'd gone from bouncing nightclubs to becoming one of the most recognizable faces in America. The Mohawk, inspired by a Mandinka warrior style, became his crown. The van, his chariot. And though he was surrounded by trained actors, he held his ground, often stealing scenes with a glare, a grunt, or a one-liner that said more than dialogue ever could. As one crew member later put it, "You didn't have to direct Mr. T, you just had to point the camera." The show's creators had built lightning in a bottle, a perfect storm of charisma, chaos, and conviction. But as the ratings climbed and the fame exploded, something else was brewing beneath the surface: tension, ego, and the price of stardom. Before Mr. T became the face of the A-Team, he was already a legend in the making, a street survivor whose rise from Chicago's toughest blocks to Hollywood fame was as unbelievable as any TV script. The man behind the Mohawk. Long before the cameras rolled and the catchphrases echoed through pop culture, Lawrence Turode was a name few knew. A kid growing up in Chicago's rough South Side, one of 12 children in a cramped apartment, learning early that life would not hand him anything. His mother was his anchor, a woman of faith, strength, and fierce pride. "Everything I am," he would say later, "I owe to my mother." In the streets of Chicago, toughness wasn't a choice, it was survival. Lawrence grew up watching crime, poverty, and inequality define his neighborhood, but he refused to let those walls define him. He found refuge in discipline, sports, school, and a stubborn belief that he could be something more. He studied martial arts, played football, and earned a scholarship to Prairie View A&M University, where he studied mathematics. But life had other plans. After leaving college, he took a job as a doorman in Chicago nightclubs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was transformative. The quiet, polite kid learned to stand tall, control crowds, and command respect without violence. His reputation grew quickly. He became known not just for his strength, but for his fairness. Soon, celebrities noticed. He transitioned from bouncer to bodyguard, protecting names like Muhammad Ali, Diana Ross, and Steve McQueen. Each job, each encounter, taught him something about fame and humility. The nickname Mr. T came from a simple declaration. "The first thing they ever called me was boy," he said. "So the first thing they'll call me now is Mr." It was more than a name. It was a statement of dignity. It symbolized every ounce of respect denied to his father and his ancestors. And from that point on, Mr. T wasn't just a person, he was a presence. Then came his unexpected break. In 1982, Sylvester Stallone was casting for Rocky III. He needed an opponent who was intimidating, charismatic, and unforgettable. When Stallone saw Mr. T on television, competing on America's toughest bouncer, he knew instantly, "That's my Clubber Lang." The film changed everything. Mr. T went from street legend to movie star overnight. His signature line, "I pity the fool," was improvised, born from instinct, not a script. Audiences loved him not just for his physical power, but for his authenticity. He didn't act tough, he was tough. But beneath that power was a deep moral center. He refused to drink or smoke. He spoke openly about his faith and his devotion to his mother. Even at the height of fame, he would visit schools to tell kids, "Stay in school. Don't be a fool." When Hollywood came calling for television, he was ready but on his terms. He wouldn't play a stereotype or a villain without heart. That's what made the A-Team such a perfect fit. Cannell and Lupo weren't hiring an actor, they were hiring a man with a message. His mohawk, inspired by a trip to the library, wasn't about fashion. He had read about Mandinka warriors in an old National Geographic and adopted their style as a symbol of pride in his African heritage. The gold chains he wore were reminders of both his past labor and his ancestors' chains. Everything about him told a story, every detail, intentional. By the time the A-Team premiered, Mr. T wasn't just playing B.A. Baracus, he was embodying everything he stood for: strength, loyalty, faith, and respect. And when children saw him on TV, they saw someone who looked powerful and good, a hero who protected others, not because he had to, but because he chose to. In a decade obsessed with image, Mr. T's authenticity was revolutionary. He wasn't polished by Hollywood, he was carved by hardship. And that raw truth, that refusal to bow to anyone's expectations, would make him not only the heart of the A-Team, but also one of the most enduring pop icons of the 80s. Fame, friction, and friendship. To the millions who tuned in every week, the A-Team looked like pure fun. Four larger-than-life heroes trading jokes, driving their black van through explosions and saving the day with style. But off-camera, the chemistry that made the show so magnetic was also what made it volatile. Fame had arrived fast, and it didn't treat everyone equally. George Peppard, the silver-haired star from classic Hollywood, came from a world of tuxedos, scripts, and studio contracts. He was old school, a perfectionist who believed in hierarchy and experience. Mr. T, by contrast, was the embodiment of the new era, raw, real, and beloved by the public in a way Peppard hadn't experienced in decades. When kids lined up for autographs on set, they weren't asking for Hannibal, they wanted Mr. T. That shift in spotlight created tension. Crew members recalled moments when Peppard felt sidelined, irritated that a man with no formal acting background had become the show's breakout star. Mr. T, meanwhile, tried to keep things respectful, often addressing Peppard as Sir. But the divide lingered, an unspoken reminder that the world was changing, and fame was no longer reserved for the traditional leading man. Still, despite the friction, the show ran like a family in motion, imperfect but loyal. Dirk Benedict, who played Face, was the natural diplomat. His smooth humor often eased the mood when egos clashed. Dwight Schultz, the unpredictable Murdoch, was the heart of the group, quirky, intelligent, and genuinely kind. He and Mr. T developed a real friendship, one rooted in humor and mutual respect. Schultz later said, "Mr. T was nothing like his image. He was gentle, thoughtful, and one of the hardest-working men I've ever known." Between takes, Mr. T would joke with crew members, hand out candy to visiting children, and even pray quietly before shooting began. His mother's teachings followed him everywhere: humility, gratitude, and kindness, even in a business that often rewarded the opposite. But fame was relentless. The show's success turned the cast into overnight celebrities. There were toy lines, lunchboxes, Saturday morning cartoons, even Mr. T cereal. For a man who had once guarded nightclubs, the transformation was surreal. He was now on magazine covers, traveling the world, meeting presidents, and visiting schools. Yet, as he would later admit, the higher you climb, the heavier the gold feels. That gold wasn't just metaphorical. The weight of his chains, once symbols of pride and defiance, began to feel symbolic of another kind of pressure: expectation. Mr. T wasn't just playing a hero anymore, he was one. At least in the eyes of children everywhere, fans looked to him for guidance, moral strength, even spiritual example. And that responsibility took its toll. Meanwhile, on set, exhaustion began to creep in. The production schedule was grueling, the stunts increasingly elaborate, and the pressure to keep ratings high was constant. Arguments broke out over scripts, over creative direction, and over who got the best lines. Still, through all the strain, the team kept showing up, driven by a mix of loyalty and pride in what they'd built. When the cameras rolled, the friction disappeared. What viewers saw was four men who, no matter how different they were, stood together. That's what made the A-Team more than just another action show. It felt like family. Even when that family was splintered behind the scenes. Years later, both Peppard and Mr. T would speak publicly about their disagreements, but with surprising grace. Peppard eventually admitted that Mr. T had brought a kind of energy no one else could. Mr. T, for his part, never spoke ill of his co-star. "We were different men," he said once, "but when it was time to work, we worked." That's what soldiers do. As the seasons went on, the fame, tension, and fatigue became part of the show's DNA. Behind the action sequences and one-liners was a group of people learning, sometimes painfully, what it meant to live up to their own legend. Mr. T later reflected that his time on the A-Team taught him more about humanity than any sermon or script could. "People think success changes you," he said. "It doesn't. It shows who you really are." And when the fame began to fade, what remained wasn't resentment or rivalry. It was a strange kind of brotherhood, forged in explosions, laughter, and long nights under studio lights. What began as a wild action series soon became something bigger. The A-Team wasn't just television anymore. It was a cultural earthquake that redefined what heroes could look like. The cultural shockwave. By 1984, the A-Team had become more than a hit. It was a movement. The black and red van was instantly recognizable. Mr. T's face was everywhere, from lunchboxes to comic books. The theme song blasted from every TV, every commercial break, every living room across America. Kids didn't just watch the A-Team, they believed in it. And in an era defined by cynicism and Cold War tension, that belief meant something. Television in the early 80s was undergoing a transformation. The golden age of family sitcoms was fading, replaced by shows with grit, style, and swagger. Yet, unlike Miami Vice or Knight Rider, the A-Team never took itself too seriously. Its explosions were spectacular, its villains cartoonish, its plots ridiculous, and that was exactly why people loved it. It was action with heart, danger with humor, violence without cruelty. Each week, millions tuned in to watch the same formula unfold. Someone in trouble, a town under siege, a team that swoops in to set things right. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Beautifully. There was something primal about it, something reassuring. The world might be unfair, but the A-Team promised that justice could still roll in on 4 black tires and a cloud of dust. Mr. T became the moral and cultural centerpiece of that phenomenon. For children, he wasn't just a TV character, he was a role model. His anti-illegal substance campaigns, motivational talks, and visits to schools made him one of the few celebrities who blurred the line between fiction and reality. Kids didn't see a difference between B.A. Baracus and Mr. T, and truthfully, there wasn't much of one. He represented strength with compassion, toughness without arrogance. The media, however, didn't always know what to make of him. Critics dismissed the show as mindless, unrealistic, even juvenile. But audiences didn't care. They weren't watching for realism, they were watching for heroes. In a decade obsessed with excess and power, the A-Team offered a rare kind of innocence. No one died. The bad guys always got their lesson, and teamwork always triumphed. It was idealism dressed in bullets and brass. Internationally, the show exploded. It aired in over 80 countries, translating not just its words, but its attitude, a mix of humor, rebellion, and American confidence that resonated worldwide. In Britain, toy shops couldn't keep the van in stock. In Asia, children imitated Mr. T's hairstyle with makeshift mohawks. Across Africa, he was seen as a symbol of black pride and strength, an image rarely broadcast on Western television at the time. And yet, behind the commercial success was something deeper. The show's DNA carried themes of redemption, loyalty, and resistance against corrupt authority, values that felt subversive in a post-Vietnam America. The A-Team weren't polished heroes. They were fugitives, outcasts, and survivors. Each week, they reminded viewers that justice didn't always wear a badge or a suit. It sometimes drove a van and refused to play by the rules. Mr. T's rise to cultural icon was equally symbolic. He represented a shift in what television considered heroic. No longer was the hero a clean-cut, white, middle-aged detective. He was bold, unapologetically different, and proud of it. For countless viewers, especially young ones from marginalized communities, seeing Mr. T on screen meant seeing themselves reflected in strength for the first time. By its third season, the A-Team was a global juggernaut. NBC cashed in with toys, posters, clothing lines, and even animated spin-offs. But fame, as always, comes with gravity. The higher a show soars, the harder it falls. The very formula that made the A-Team beloved would soon start to wear thin. The explosions were still loud, the jokes still sharp, but behind the camera, the pressure was building, and the end of an era was approaching faster than anyone expected. But, like every great mission, even the A-Team couldn't run forever. Behind the laughter and glory, the cracks had already begun to show. The fall, the fade, and the legacy. By 1986, the once invincible A-Team was starting to lose steam. What had begun as one of television's most original ideas was now caught in the cycle every hit show eventually faces: familiarity. Viewers still tuned in, but the excitement that once defined the series began to fade. The formula, build the plan, roll the van, fire the guns, nobody dies, had run its course. NBC tried to adjust. The network pushed for new storylines, darker tones, and even changes to the team's structure. Season 5 introduced new characters and shifted the setting to more espionage-driven plots. But the charm that had defined the A-Team, that mix of humor, loyalty, and chaos, wasn't something you could re-engineer. Fans wanted the camaraderie, not the corporate missions. For the cast, especially Mr. T, the change was bittersweet. Fame had brought fortune, but it had also typecast him. The very persona that made him a household name became a kind of cage. He was seen not as an actor, but as Mr. T, the tough guy with gold chains and a growl. Hollywood didn't know what to do with him outside that box. They saw the muscles and the mohawk, he said later, but they didn't see the man. As ratings declined, so did morale. The long shoot schedules, network interference, and creative exhaustion began to wear everyone down. George Peppard grew frustrated with the changes. Dwight Schultz admitted that the fun had started to fade. Yet, when the show finally wrapped in 1987, there was no bitterness from Mr. T. Instead, there was gratitude. "I'll always be proud of what we did," he told a reporter. We gave people hope. We made them smile. After the finale aired, the A-Team didn't disappear. It transformed. Reruns filled TV schedules around the world, introducing new generations to the van, the music, and the myth. It became part of pop culture's permanent memory. Its dialogue, its energy, even its campiness became iconic. Decades later, I Pity the Fool still echoed through memes, interviews, and parodies. Mr. T's fame evolved into something deeper. He turned his celebrity into service, working with charities, speaking at schools, and using his platform to inspire kids from the same kind of neighborhoods he grew up in. He said, "If you're blessed, you bless others." That's the real meaning of strength. It was a philosophy that outlasted the show itself. When Hollywood revisited the A-Team in 2010 with a big-budget film remake, fans were curious to see if Mr. T would return as B.A. Baracus. But he declined. "I can't improve on what we did," he explained. That was lightning in a bottle. To him, the A-Team was sacred, a time capsule of innocence and hope, born from the chaos of the 80s and powered by faith, loyalty, and friendship. In hindsight, the decline of the A-Team wasn't a failure. It was inevitable. Every cultural phenomenon burns brightest before it fades. But its legacy never truly dimmed. The show changed the shape of television heroes. It proved that audiences craved morality wrapped in adventure, and that humor could coexist with heart. For Mr. T, that legacy wasn't measured in Nielsen ratings or reruns. It was in the letters from kids who said he gave them courage, in the smiles of fans who still shouted "BA" across airports, in the memory of a role that made him a hero to millions who never felt they had one. When asked years later what the A-Team meant to him, he paused before answering. "It meant family," he said simply. "It meant believing in good when the world didn't." Where the A-Team ended up. When the A-Team aired its final episode in 1987, it didn't just mark the end of a show. It closed a chapter in the lives of 4 actors who'd become part of television history. Each member of the team, George Peppard, Dirk Benedict, Dwight Schultz, and Mr. T, walked away carrying the weight of fame in very different ways. George Peppard, the cigar-chomping leader Hannibal Smith, was already a Hollywood veteran before the series began. But the A-Team revived his career, giving him a second act as an action icon. Yet, behind the charm was a man fighting personal battles. Peppard struggled with alcoholism and health issues for years. When he passed away in 1994, co-stars remembered him as tough, proud, but deeply professional. A man who believed in giving audiences their money's worth every single time the cameras rolled. Dirk Benedict, who played the suave Templeton faceman, Peck, transitioned into a quieter life after the show. While he appeared in films and guest roles, he often reflected on the A-Team as a rare example of television optimism. In later interviews, Benedict spoke about how the show's humor and morality were something TV doesn't have anymore. It had fun without cynicism. Dwight Schultz, known to fans as Howling Mad Murdoch, remained close to the show's legacy. Unlike many who get typecast, he leaned into his eccentric image and built a successful voice acting career in animation and video games. He also became an active voice in fan communities, often appearing at conventions to share behind-the-scenes stories. And then there was Mr. T.B. Baracus, the heart of the show. Unlike many of his peers, he turned his fame into lifelong purpose. From anti-bullying campaigns to motivational talks, he stayed true to his roots: discipline, faith, and kindness. Decades later, he remains a cultural icon, not just for the gold chains, but for the sincerity behind them. 4 men, one unforgettable team. Their paths may have diverged, but together, they built something television still hasn't replicated: a brotherhood of action, heart, and unforgettable charisma. That's the real secret Mr. T wanted us to remember. Loyalty, courage, and heart never go out of style. Subscribe for more stories behind the legends.